Hey, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Wang, and I am happy to moderate a very exciting panel discussion on homegrown production, how to leverage US manufacturing innovations to really make a true impact on climate change. This panel will be focused on a few key themes, which are of particular interest for, I think, US innovation in particular. First is the question of how do we take new innovations coming out of the labs, whether it's new materials, new components, new module and pack designs, and scale them up cost effectively to truly make an impact on the mobility industry and other energy storage industries. And the second question is really diving into the science of manufacturing itself. How do we fundamentally manufacture in a different way to help accelerate how we move from lab all the way through to deployment? And we have a very exciting panel today. First, I'll briefly introduce myself. My name is Richard Wang. I'm the founder and CEO at Cuberg, a lithium metal battery startup spun out of Stanford, out of my PhD work, commercializing the world's first lithium metal rechargeable battery for the electric aviation industry. And we have four excellent panelists here with us today, which I'll go through and introduce in alphabetical order, starting with Selena Mikołajczak, who is the Chief Manufacturing Officer at QuantumScape, and has previously had an illustrious career leading cell quality and materials engineering at Tesla, as well as serving as the VP of Engineering and Battery Technology at Panasonic at the Reno Gigafactory. Next, we have Christine Persson, who's the Director of the Molecular Foundry at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, one of the DOE's premier nanoscience national user facilities. And she also founded and directs the multinational materials projects, which we'll get into a little bit here as it pertains to the science of manufacturing itself. Prabhakar Patil is the former CEO at LG Chem Power, one of the world's great battery manufacturers, and previously served for quite a while as the chief engineer for the hybrid escape at Ford. And he's on the advisory board of many battery startups, including Adionics and Cobalt 27. And then our fourth panelist is Sergio Coronado, who is the Senior Vice President of Future Innovation, New Business Development and Licensing at Duracell, and previously had a long career at Procter & Gamble as well. And so with that introduction, we will dive into our first question, which really gets at the heart of, I think, what a lot of people are thinking these days around manufacturing and battery innovations, which really is taking this lens that historically chemistry innovations have really struggled with cost-effective scale-up. And this has been a repeated challenge when we looked at the industry over the past couple of decades, with not many technologies successfully making it through to mass market commercialization. And so I think we'll start with Sergio to provide your perspective on what lessons can we learn from that history, and what is your view of how to do this successfully?
Okay, hi everyone, this is Sergio. Yes, I think our learning at Duracell has been that battery systems are complex, right? There is a, you need to consider materials, you need to consider cell design, you need to consider process manufacturing, and then final applications, right? So one of the challenges that we've seen is that I think there's plenty of ideas and new technologies coming on stream, being developed in labs, in universities, different institutions, companies. But I think one of the things that is going to be a challenge is how do you bring those technologies to the market, to commercialization, right? And there is a big gap between that, right, and how to get there. And one of the points that I'd like to make is we need to think about it in a very complete manner, right? We need to think about, as we scale up technologies, it's not only about a particular piece of the pie. We need to take into account the materials, right? What kind of materials we're going to be using. And it's very different to produce a few grams of the materials and to go and scale up to tons, right? When you're talking about tons and industrial scale, things like impurities become huge, right? All of a sudden become a very, very important factor. So it's important to take that into account. Same thing with cell design. When you think about cell design, it's very different to maybe prove the technology in a small scale, maybe, milliwatts, for example, milliwatt hours. And it's very different to try to build a battery that is going to have, like watt hours or kilowatt hours or even larger. So the scale up of that takes a lot of effort, a lot of development, because there are considerations on geometries in cell design that are very important to consider. Similar thing with manufacturing and process, right? It's once you have some viable technology, there may be situations where it's not necessarily that efficient or that reliable, right? And those are major issues of development that need to be addressed, and they need discovery, they need invention, and they need time. So I think my point of view is the industry has suffered through all of this, right? It's like when you're trying to bring a technology to commercialization, you have to tackle all of this. And there's always a killer issue in each one of this that could be different, right? So I think as we think about learnings from the past, is as we think about new technology, we need to really consider all these different moving aspects before we really have a technology ready. The other piece that I'd like to mention is there's also the piece about market, right? Another thing that I've noticed in the industry is that sometimes the development cycle of batteries is longer than some of the other areas in OEMs or electronics or even software platforms. So what happens is, and I've seen it a few times, is that a technology gets developed, and by the time a battery technology gets developed, and by the time it's developed, it's already too late. You know, the market has moved on. The application is not there. So there is also something that I would like to comment about timing of the battery development and technology together with the application. That is really, really important to get it right. If we don't get this right, you know, we come out with that technology. I think LFP is a perfect example. You know, that was produced in the US. It was the right technology, but now at the time, the EV market was not that big, right? So it was very small. So it was not, the timing was not perfect, even though it was a good technology. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, but those are the kind of key challenges that I see.
Great, thank you. And Selena, we're gonna take this question to you as well, and also curious to ask you your perspective on maybe how to build some foresight into looking at manufacturing challenges, even when you're developing the core materials itself, to tackle this extended time to market. But would love to hear your perspective on this question.
Yeah, sure, thanks. You know, manufacturing scale up is a process, right? A lot of companies have done it. I lived through it at Tesla and helped do that. And then, you know, I joined Panasonic and I studied a lot about kind of the history of Panasonic and how they'd grown their battery business just in general. I thought a lot about this when I joined QuantumScape, right? Because I've got to go and take this technology to market. And, you know, what made for successful manufacturing ramp and how do you do it? It's like a key question for me. And the thing is, I realize you take this in steps, right? So the first step is you have to have a differentiating technology because you're coming up against incumbents. And if your technology isn't so much better, you're never gonna be able to compete with the incumbents. And in many ways, that's what we did at Tesla. You know, the electric car that Tesla put out there was so different than the ICE engine vehicle that we had the room to do the manufacturing scale up to bring that car into market. Where if we'd gone to something that was very just incremental to the industry right now, that wouldn't have gone so well. So that first piece has to be, you have to have that compelling technology. And then you need, you know, as you start thinking about manufacturing, you have to put the foundational things in that are really they're gonna be the processes that make that the rest of the manufacturing rests on, right? So for batteries, because they are really high precision and highly engineered systems now, right? And it wasn't the case back in the old alkaline days necessarily, but now they're so they require such advanced manufacturing. You have to think about your digital architecture a lot. You know, this means things like MES systems and SCADA systems and your data collection systems, and then how, you know, you're going to evaluate your product. And then also there's some very traditional systems that you really need to have that are for success. You need that good quality system. You have to have it. You need proper program management. You need a proper EH&S culture. So you want to have all those things in place. Now, you can't afford a heavyweight version of these things, okay, because that'll just stall your entire process development. But you have to have good foundation so that you can scale these systems with the rest of your manufacturing. Then the next thing you need to recognize is that your first generation tools are not going to be your final generation tools. The hardware, you know, we spend a lot of time thinking about manufacturing equipment. You're going to put that first set of tools in, you're going to learn a lot from them, then you're going to put that next generation of tools in. And that's a continuing process for cost-effective manufacturing even now. You know, at Panasonic, great automation tools that have been making lithium-ion cells for 20 years, they've seen substantial evolutions to be able to produce the best cells every day, right? So you have to have that continuously. We're going to be iterating and developing our technology. And then finally, you need a committed, intelligent workforce, people that are really going to work the long, crazy hours that are needed to do this thing. Because scaling manufacturing, entering something that is not steady state, it's never comfortable. You work a lot of late hours. You need that commitment. That was something that Tesla had a lot of. It's also something that Panasonic in Japan culture has a lot of. And that's something that Silicon Valley has a lot of. So, at QuantumScape, we look at, being in Silicon Valley, it's that's one of the big strengths is that we can tap a lot of people who are so deeply committed.
Thank you. And then related follow-up for you, Selena, is taking, for example, LFP as a framing and perhaps cautionary tale. A lot of the original material science was developed in the US at UT Austin, I believe, but much of the manufacturing ended up primarily in China. And it was driven by market incentives as well as a bit of sort of the IP landscape. And generally, the US has a lot of, let's say, materials science IP, but much of the cell design and manufacturing expertise, IP and capabilities are in Asia. So as we look to commercialize next-gen technologies, what advice do you have for navigating this kind of legal and capabilities landscape?
Yeah. U.S. government does a great job of funding fundamental research. And the research project's not that big. U.S. government funds a lot of different researchers. You get a lot of different voices. You get great material science here. But the difference with manufacturing, to scale manufacturing, you have to concentrate capital. You can't, spreading it out, great for research, bad for manufacturing. You have to bring it all together. You have to, fund factories that are expensive. So what does that mean? Well, the stakes are really big, right? If you fail, lots of people lose their jobs, investors lose money. So you don't put that financing together very easily. Now, Asian companies or countries, a lot of them have developed strategic initiatives and government support in various ways to support their industry that way. US is different. US relies on the capital markets. So you go to investors to raise funds. For an investor to put money down for this, they know there's risk. So the reward has to look really good. So again, you can't really be there for incremental, small margin profits, right? For an investor to really look at funding battery manufacturing, the reward has to be really big. So you have to have that groundbreaking technology. If you do that, and you have that product that is differentiable, the markets will help you get that manufacturing going. That is what Tesla did, right? But in the past, battery business has not really looked like that high margin business, very capital intensive, a lot of time. But now batteries have become mission critical for the transportation sector. So things look a little different. And, if you have a great technology at this point, you can say, look, there are customers. If we make batteries, people will buy them. Yay. That's great news. And then the second piece is if you have a technology that you think is differentiating, you can say, look, this technology, it's not going to be an incremental, benefit over what you've already got in the marketplace. This has a chance to have a big effect, give you big margins on your return. At that point, you can make a go of it in the US.
Great. Thank you. And my next question is for Prabhakar, which is maybe zooming out in general. With your role at LG, you certainly looked both at foreign sectors as well as the US for manufacturing. And what do you see as perhaps specific challenges the US faces in building out advanced battery factories, and what could we improve?
Yeah. The best way to analyze the local cell production challenges is by looking at the desired outcome, which is to produce high quality, high performance cells in high volume that are cost competitive with the global leaders. And since 65% of the cost of the cell is in materials, cathode, anode, electrolyte, and separator, a cell manufacturer has to have good and manufacturable cell designs, as Sergio was alluding to, that have been cost optimized. And this requires R&D depth in materials, as well as an experience base in production cell design, not just lab scale, which we do not have, because building up this kind of experience base only happens over time. And now we don't have the time because the market is already accelerating and unforgiving. Second is the supply of high and consistent quality materials in high volume, especially cathode, since it accounts for half the material costs. And we need about 16,000 tons of the stuff, 25,000 for LFP for a 10 gigawatt hour factory, which is now the minimum size. And we do not have the cathode supply base, particularly for LFP. And next is manufacturing know-how, but that one we will wait on for a question a little bit later on. So the point is that there are many pitfalls, and if you're on your own, you discover them all, sometimes one at a time. So the best way is to do it jointly with an experienced partner until you build up the capability, which is exactly what the major OEMs are currently doing. On the cathode material side, fortunately, the challenge is a little bit easier since it's a much simpler process with few steps. And we already have companies that know how to make thousands of tons of materials with exacting specifications with high yield. And I believe we should be able to get that set up, the cathode material that is in about 24 months.
Great, thank you for that. Moving on to our next area, now talking a bit on the manufacturing. A question for both Christine and starting with Christine. What roles can data science play? We think about accelerating the pace of innovation, moving from stuff.
Thanks, Richard. Can you hear me? Because the sound is breaking up on my side. Okay, sounds great. Yeah, that's what I do at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory and UC Berkeley. We're all about data-driven materials design, early and sort of pre-competitive almost in some cases, but also working with industry. It's very timely. Data-driven innovation of materials has been going through a revolution in the last 2 decades. And Sergio and I have a good joint experience with leveraging internal company teams with external computational horsepower and novel innovation in materials design. In 2004, 2005, we had a joint project on trying to see if there's anything outside of manganese dioxide as a cathode in alkaline batteries. And this little sort of team of researchers scanned the whole periodic table. Over 100,000 compounds were investigated, fueled by the innovation in first principles calculations and scanning for voltage, stability, capacity of these possible materials, and maybe even most importantly, in this case, stability in the operating environment in the highly alkaline electrolytes that actually killed most of the compounds. After scanning all those materials, 200 seemed more likely than others. And this is something that you can't do experimentally today. You can't do that kind of survey. You have to use another tool. And now we have this new toolbox or tool in our toolbox of doing this computational screening. So we took those 200 compounds to Duracell and asked, like, is there anything here that would interest you? And they sort of took that list and went away. And for a couple of years, we didn't hear anything. And then at some point they came back and said, it actually was one that we were particularly interested in. We've changed it. We've protected it. We've figured out, but we still need to come out. Speaking to Sergio's points about it takes a long time just to figure out how to make something cost effective. The first ways they made it was tremendously expensive, and that just wasn't viable if you're going to make alkaline batteries at the scale that they're doing it. And they had to come up with ways of, defect chemistries, engineering this material from the compound that we gave them to something that was inherently similar crystal structure, a similar chemistry, but optimized for where it needed to be. And I think that speaks to sort of the science of manufacturing and where we could meet from a pre-competitive or for a basic energy science portfolio, all together with teams in the manufacturing and in industry. I got so excited about this that I ran off to Lawrence Berkeley and started the materials project, which was very much built on the model of doing data-driven materials design. And today the materials project is probably the world's most popular materials database. We have over 250,000 registered users, and we deliver millions of data points to the world's engineers and scientists, and enabling them to do this kind of data-driven research by themselves, looking for the special materials for photovoltaics, for batteries, for anything, because those fundamental properties that we can compute today are common to many of the questions that people are asking. So I'm tremendously excited about this, and I'm hoping to partner in different ways. And I'm just going to stop there and see what other people have to add.
Hey, Christina, I'd like to build on your points because I think to me, one of the learnings on the collaboration that we had was that I think what is really powerful, and it's something that we can take as a learning, is this idea of we were approaching the problem from a practical point of view, an experimental point of view, but having a partner that is doing fundamentals modeling along the whole development process was a major enabler. Because one of the things that we found is as we're trying to synthesize this new material, right? Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. So we have to go back and say, tell us what's going on, right? So I think to me, there's something about keeping those two vectors going on the development that is really, really powerful. And modeling, the modeling of batteries is too complex to do it in one shot, right? So it has to be kind of a collaboration of experimental data, first principles modeling, and go that through the whole development process that is really powerful. And I think that we as an industry, the more we adopt that, the faster we will go.
And it really is a dual. I mean, it's like those two teams talking to each other and educating each other. We wouldn't have been able to figure out how to screen materials for stability in aqueous media if it hadn't been for your team of engineers challenging us and saying, like, this is ridiculous. These are things are not going to survive. So really figuring that part out was a major aspect of the collaboration.
That's great to hear. And I also used the materials project during my PhD, so I can attest to its usefulness. Take a look if you haven't already.
That's good.
And it's a related challenge. This one is for Prabhakar and then Christine. Is again in terms of partnerships between companies and national labs. I think this modeling aspect is one natural area where it's highly complementary between industry and national labs. But when you really talk about manufacturing innovations, process innovations, much of this is very closely held by companies as trade secrets and highly proprietary. And so what areas do you see in the manufacturing process itself that could be ripe for collaborations, Prabhakar?
Yeah, as you indicated, I think the manufacturing know-how and process control parameters are trade secrets that are built up over time and actually continue to evolve as chemistry and performance continue to improve. And so without these, you just make scrap in a hurry as you speed up your assembly line. And so I will not name names, but you can see this reflected in the delays in ramping up to nameplate capacity, even for companies with access to resources and capital. And so as a calibration, world leaders are now at a scrap rate of about 4 to 6% in cell production, which means that each step of roughly a 30-odd step process has to get to like a 99.98% yield. And a couple of ways to level the playing field is to go for next generation processes, such as, for example, the semi-solid that is being pursued and licensed by 24M rather than chasing established ones. And another one is to leverage simulation in the form of digital twins rather than trial and error to accelerate the ramp up while maintaining yields. And at this, I'll turn it over to Christine. Maybe she can add a little more in terms of use of data and simulation in ramping up.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I think one of the aspects Selena talked about, that it's so important to have a killer material or sort of like something that is tremendously a step function better. And that was the same case when we were working with Duracell. 10% better wasn't really going to motivate us to launch a completely new product. And that's something where I think that this early partnership could help because it speaks to the manufacturing too, right? You don't want to invest so much money and effort into something that's only 10% or 15% better. So partnering early with idealized compounds and compound spaces and material spaces is really, I often talk to industries and it's not always that they give me exactly the secret version they're looking at. They give me versions of it, that they think that this is okay if you work on this. And what I tell them about these compounds or these coatings or these electrolyte molecules will help them to inform their manufacturing process. And they may not tell you exactly how that's going to inform it, and that's fine by me because I'm just figuring out the basic properties of these molecules or these materials. And in some cases, we can even publish on it. So I think there's many things we can figure out that is sort of in a more idealized competitive space. We can also develop data sets that are more general, that speaks to trends about how stable materials are, how will they react to certain environments. That will also speak to manufacturing process. when we worked with Duracell and Sergio's team, it was very much this back and forth. We made it in this way, and now we saw these domains in the material. How's that going to speak to its performance? So we could tell them, well, if we just take this domain and imagine that's a whole material, suddenly now we can talk about what kind of properties that should have. Does that speak to its voltage profile? So there are many things you can do along the way of idealized, taking out a piece of it, streamlining data sets. I'm also tremendously excited about the future of automation. So we do automation in the computational world, but in the experimental world, especially on the lab side and the university side, the advent of some automated labs is coming. So imagine now coming to a national lab and asking, what are the different kinds of synthesis processes that will give me this particular optimized version of this material? And again, it may not be exactly what you're looking for, but it's close enough so that you can share that information with your lab partners. And we will be able to go through those formulations on a more sort of basic level before you start designing your manufacturing process. And I think that teamwork is the secret of how we're going to solve science and manufacturing and accelerate it.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think that's a great point to then transition into some of our audience questions. We have a few minutes left. There's, I think, one really interesting. So, topic of assets. This is a lot these in the oil and gas industry. We're talking this idea that a lot of these oil and gas investments may not have their payback because use cases will change. And right now, we're looking at deployments of up to multiple terawatt hours of lithium-ion gigafactory capacity around the world. Is there a risk for any of this capacity to become stranded as we look to next-gen chemistries? What is your perspective on this?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Selena.
Yeah, thing about the battery industry right now, which makes it so interesting, is there's so much demand for cells, right? And yes, everyone wants the best cells they can possibly get, but a lot of people just want cells, right? And you can make a great, compelling car with current technology, like a very compelling car, and you've got work that you want to be doing on the development side. So. People talk about converting factories, and you would never convert a factory. You would just keep going and keep making stuff with mild modifications to the tools and still be making a compelling product. So that risk is really not, it's not a real risk right now.
And maybe I can just add to that, just taking some specific example like solid state, which is what Selena is looking at, that may be the major disruptive change. But if you break down the CapEx, for example, for a cell manufacturing facility, roughly about 1/3 each is in electrode production, cell assembly, and then finishing or formation. So even if you went to solid state, the cathodes are likely to remain very similar. And so you're only talking about maybe 15 to 20% of the overall CapEx that may need to change as you go. And most of the cell manufacturers understand with their own roadmaps where the technology is going. And in some sense, they're trying to future-proof both the assembly lines as well as the equipment. So I agree with Selena. I don't see that as a major risk in terms of having stranded assets as we build up the capacity.
And then I think we have time for one question, which is getting at the point of battery circular economy. And so the role of ultimately second use and recycling and how that impacts the US in particular in localizing supply chains and materials. So feel free, if anyone wants to take that one, I think it's a very interesting one as well.
Well, I can start and then maybe somebody can jump in because as you pointed out, arbitrarily we call about 75-80% of the capacity is end of life in vehicle. But the lithium-ion battery will degrade predictably and gracefully to about 50%, which means it has another 10 years of life left in it. And you can put that for second use, especially in stationary, where the energy density loss is not that big a deal. Up till now, it was difficult to do because the batteries packs were all weird shapes and sizes. And if you have to do remanufacturing, you lose the game because the new batteries are coming down in cost so rapidly. But that is starting to change. These flat packs that Tesla started the trend on Those are relatively easy to put together. So that's one thing I think you're going to see more of second use for stationary energy storage. And even at the end of that, and there I'm happy to say that the US is actually leading the North America in the final end of life recycling with life cycle or redwood materials and so forth, because you can actually recycle roughly about 95% of the materials because nothing is destroyed. And in some sense, it can be cheaper than fresh materials. So it helps both stabilize the prices as well as address the issue of what do you do at the end of life of these cells. You don't want to go into landfills.
Yeah, I think, the recycling aspect is very reasonable and exciting. I mean, these are metals. They're fundamentally, they are metals. And when you dig them out of the ground, they are an ore, which, you have to then process into the metal, the final thing that you're going to use. Using the recycling stream as your source of ore is a no-brainer, right? The processing is a little different, but it's not that different.
Great, thank you. And I think that's a great way to wrap up our panel. Thank you to all of you for joining and participating. I think it was a very illuminating and insightful conversation. So thanks for everyone for your time.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye. Thank you.